Welcome everyone in Nigeria and the rest of the world. I am Gimba Umar and this is State of the Nation. Be part of the show. Tweet at Gimba Umar CTV. Use the hashtag State of the Nation and let's get your thoughts in. We begin with safety concerns on the highway. At least 9 people were confirmed killed and over 50 vehicles were destroyed on Thursday evening on the Otedola end of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Could this have been avoided is the question on everyone's lips. Deputy Co-Marshal, Operations Federal Road Safety Corps, Rujapo Ojeme, joins me from our Abuja studios. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on the show. I'd like you to take a look at that very amateur video caught on tape just moments before that tragedy happened. Now that's it. Let's take a look at it very carefully.
Thank God, trailer no lose control. What is that petrol? What is that petrol? Man, my God, for me, hold on, an accident will happen now. Thank God, trailer no lose control.
Now, those are the visuals that we got from an amateur video just moments before that accident happened. We just saw that trailer laden with petrol in it, that tanker, as a matter of fact. What's your immediate reaction looking at that video, if we have to analyze that?
Good evening, and thank you for bringing me here. It's like he had issues with his brakes, and maybe his motorboy, and they were trying to stop the vehicle, which is ridiculous, really. You can't single-handedly want to use your hands to stop a tanker that's rolling back. And because they couldn't do that, the tanker just rolled back and then crashed into vehicles that were on the lane waiting to go home.
Is it remotely possible that in that kind of situation, in traffic, the driver of that tanker could have done something different?
He could have gone off the road. He could have stayed on the shoulder. He could have warned people. Instead of trying to stop the vehicle, he could actually have stopped the vehicle on the side of the road, because apparently he wasn't inside that vehicle. He wasn't inside the vehicle, neither was the motorboy inside that vehicle. He could have gone off the shoulder. I would try to say, if you have issues with your brake, you could have gone off the road and then stopped by the shoulder of the road, or used the middle guardrail to stop your movement. But I think because they were not in the vehicle just continued to roll back and then crash into vehicles and started spilling its fuel.
It's not the first time, really, that this has happened. In fact, in Mina Suleja Road, close to you over there in Abuja, earlier in the day, another tanker exploded. Thankfully, no one was killed in this one. But what must be done by agencies such as the FRSC, your agency, in collaboration with legislators, for instance, concerning moving petrol and kerosene by trucks?
What the Mina own, actually, the truck we learned went off the road and actually was the one who hit the tanker. But luckily, like you said, nobody was injured. The fire service was able to get there, the way to put off the fire, and then we just have some minor injuries. What we have tried to do, about 3 years ago, we had a meeting with tanker PTD Nupeng and then the other stakeholders. And what we came out from that meeting was that we needed to look at the tank farms where they were. From the meeting we had with the Tanker Drivers Association and NATO, we also looked at the issue of licensing for the tanker drivers. And then we agreed, and we have opened 4 centers at different locations in the country where tanker drivers normally stop to load fuel, where they can get their licenses and be registered and tested. We also agreed at that meeting, and that is working, that all the tank farms in the country, FRSC should put staff. We had some staff who were trained in France. So we have what we call the Safe to Load program. We have certain basic safety measures that we look out for. So at the tank farms, when the tankers come to load, we check for these basic safety issues. And if they are not there, we don't allow them to load. In May, for instance, we were able to check about 7,280 tankers at the tank farms. We have about 59 tank farms, about 35 are in Lagos. We have 10 in Delta, Cross River, and then in Rivers as well. So we have staff who work there. We don't let them load. So those ones do not load until they go back and put some measure of minimum safety on those vehicles. What we've discovered is that it has kind of reduced the incidences of crashes. But we also know that there's something the tankers have that's called a safety valve, which doesn't allow the fuel to spill if it goes into a crash. We are talking with the Deputy Dinupeng, some of them are already fixing it. And in fact, arising from this, we're having a meeting with them in a week's time, calling the independent marketers, the major marketers, and other stakeholders. Because we discovered that most of the tankers don't belong to the major marketers, because they have very strict, very stringent safety measures at the parts where they load. And that was what gave rise to our Safe to Load program. It has helped, because when we look at the crashes of tankers in the last 3 years, it has actually trended down. In 2016, we had about 180. In 2017, we had about 143. And then for this year, that's between January and now, we have just about 113. We are having the meetings. We are looking at the operations of the tank farms. We're beginning to see that some of them are loading at night. We're having meetings with them. And we hope that arising from the meeting we're going to have next week, that we'll be able to curb some of these incidences.
Okay.
Because if the safety valve is there, then it doesn't spill, even if there's a crash.
Interesting.
And in the cases where we've had tankers...
Still in line with that, my apologies if you just allow me to butt in. Your unit, the command in Suleja, the commander in Suleja, that's Mr. Olayinka Akonde, he has confirmed to Channels Television that that accident in Minna was as a result of overspeeding. And I recall that there is a plan in place by the FRSC to check overspeeding by installing speed limiting devices in trucks. That's as of last year. I think that was also proposed to the National Assembly at some point. But what's the current status of that initiative?
Let me give just this maize example. Of the 7,000 plus vehicles that we checked, over 6,000 actually have the speed limiters in place, which helps to reduce, we're not saying that there will be no crash, but it helps to reduce the speed of the vehicles. And most of the tankers are complying with that. But we're still continuing with the enforcement to ensure that they all do. And then for the trailers and the trucks, we're just getting into an MOU with MP as well, to be sure that any tanker that goes, or any truck that goes there to carry dry cargo, has to have some basic safety incident. Then having a speed limiting device is also a must for those vehicles. Once that is done, it means that going into the MPA, going into any of the ports across the country, you need to have a speed limiter and then have all the basic safety measures in place. We have an MOU with the Beer Group. It's still in the issue of safety and managing the trucks that if we can do all of that, I think we can, with continuous public enlightenment and awareness program, we should be able to see the numbers coming down.
Now, if we have to revisit that picture again, that video of the truck, just the tanker just rolling backwards, do you think, for instance, we know that the governor of Lagos State did visit that area just this evening, and what are your expectations? What must be done as a means to deter people from having cars that are less roadworthy? For instance, that truck just rolling backwards. What can be done as a punitive measures?
What can be done is to ensure that every truck that plies the road has basic safety measures. What we are trying to do is to make sure that where they load from, they comply. And that we are trying to find out where that truck loaded from. We've been able to get the number, and then by next week we should be able to find out. If we find out where it loaded from, then we'll be able to find out if it met the standard or if it was even checked at all. Because if it was booked after our men had closed, then we'll have a problem. But then we can sanction some of the tank farms like we are already doing. So if we find that a vehicle was involved in a crash that had been designated not safe, then we can prosecute the tank farm where it loaded from. We're trying to do that with this tank. We have the number. But next week we should be able to find out who owns it and where it loaded from. And if it loaded from a park and had been designated, then we can prosecute the tank farm owners.
So they're also looking at our solutions. What role will the National Assembly play in getting that very crucial protectionist piece of legislation? And we've always had problems with implementing it. But that piece of legislation and its implementation to the letter, what must be done to try to see that legislation is put in place to protect lives and property, especially ones that have to do with accidents such as this one that we've experienced in Lagos?
What legislation will do is that everybody will have to comply. It won't be a case of this FRSC just trying to introduce new things that won't work. If we come out of that meeting, then we can have an articulated policy which we can send to the National Assembly. And critically, it will be that every tanker that plies the Nigerian road has to meet basic standards, has to have a safety valve. So this issue of spill, because if that fuel hadn't spilled from that tanker, it probably would just have crashed into a couple of vehicles, wouldn't have had the fire. The valve is very critical. And we've discovered that tankers that have it do not spill. So that is something that we also need to look at. We're hoping that from the meeting that we're going to have, we can articulate a policy that we can send to the National Assembly that will insist that every tanker that comes into the country and is going to be used to carry fuel has that safety valve.
So are you saying that, are you submitting that about 60 or is it 70% of the tankers now in the country have that valve?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
I must thank you.
Most of those who work with the major marketers do not have that issue. Yes.
I must thank you on end for your analysis and submissions on the subject. Deputy Co-Marshal Operations, Federal Road Safety Corps, Rujakpo Ojeme. Thank you so much indeed. The Governors Forum pays condolence visits to Plateau State. The national chairman of the APC, Adams Oshomole, also makes an appearance in Jos. That's next when we return. Stay with us.